Hi, this is Dr. Cooper, and this is a podcast for the ENH295 Banned Books and Censorship class. Today's podcast is just a quick podcast on the rhetorical analysis or literary analysis journal post that you did last week. So I've been looking through them, and there's a couple of things that I think a few of you missed. So I want to go through that really quick. When you click on the modules, there were 2 lessons that I gave you to do in the first week of the semester. Lesson 1, Rhetorical Analysis, and Lesson 1A, the lottery. Now I can see where a lot of you may have gone through and looked at Lesson 1A, or 1. So it goes through basically how to write the rhetorical analysis. And it gives you the steps, and it talks about what SOAPs is, and it talks about rhetorical strategies, and so forth. But I think what's happening is a lot of you aren't putting the 2 elements together. And the second lesson does a better job of that. So I realized that in the first lesson that I was just looking at, that there's an example of what your introduction paragraph should look like. And it's not as good as the introduction paragraph that I show you in Lesson 1A. So you have to read this short story, The Lottery, or you can even listen to it. But I've given it to you in text form and in audio form. But then I made this video that talks about how to do a rhetorical analysis of the lottery. Now, if you're not a good visual learner and you wanted to actually see that in text form, you can just click this link here. And by doing so, you will see that I have in green an example of a rhetorical analysis journal post highlighting the parts that you're supposed to do. For instance, if you're doing SOAPs like you're supposed to, and not very many of you did SOAPs, so if you're doing that, you'll see that speaker, occasion, and subject pop up in your first sentence that you write. So I know just by reading the first sentence if you're doing what I've asked you to do, because you would have said something like American author Shirley Jackson in her critically acclaimed short story, The Lottery. So many of you did not introduce the author or the title of the novel that you're reading in your journal post. So your first sentence should look very similar to this one. Now, the most important paragraph, though, that's just also part of your thesis, is the purpose. So what is Jackson's purpose? Jackson's purpose is to show, in the case of the lottery, the collective mentality is a theme. So in this case, the author is analyzing theme. But even further down, I've given you a second journal to analyze right here. And in this one, the author of the journal post is analyzing contrast. So there's got to be a key element, a rhetorical element, that you are going to be analyzing for this to be an analysis. If you're not doing that, then all you're doing is telling us the story. Now, keep in mind that we are all reading the same story. So whenever you're repeating what's happening in the story, we're all reading your journal going, yeah, I know that already. So make sure that you have read these 2 examples, because they will give you a good example of how to analyze 1, theme, and it will go through the SOAPs, S-O-S-P-A. They're not in order, but that stands for SOAPs. So you have to cover speaker, occasion, and subject, your purpose, which is going to be your thesis, and then who's your audience. Okay? Now, a lot of times you can skip some of these elements, for instance, audience, because our post is very short. But you can't skip purpose and speaker, occasion, and subject. It's just not possible, because then you're skipping a thesis. So a lot of people have a hard time with this whole tone thing. Well, if you're having a trouble with that, then skip that one for now. You'll understand tone more as we move further along in the class. Okay? So that's your introductory. This could be a paragraph by itself, or it could be just the first part of your journal. Then you have to do your body. And again, there are some elements that can be excluded from the body, but you have to support your thesis. And that's where we get into the third sentence, explains how the rhetorical strategies you discussed in the previous sentences help the writer achieve his purpose. That's what we want to hear about. We don't want to hear about the story. We're reading the story ourselves. Okay? The fourth sentence identifies the effect the writer's use of these rhetorical strategies have on the audience. Okay? So again, you're not just retelling the story, you're talking about how the writer is using this rhetorical effect. So it's going to help that you go back in to the pages that I've introduced to you, and you also look at the lessons. So if we go into week 2, I think I introduced a lesson in week 2 on D.H. Lawrence and the elements of plot. So some of you may have been trying to analyze plot. This is probably the most difficult analysis to do, because when you're analyzing plot, a lot of what you're talking about is retelling the story. So here you can see that my video is not showing up. Well, one of the reasons why is because I'm using Chrome, and if this is happening to you, there's a little shield up here, and when you click that shield, you can click Load Unsafe Script. You can also just choose a different browser. Go to Internet Explorer or Mozilla. So now you can see that my video is showing, and I'm talking about inciting force. So if you're trying to do an analysis of plot, don't try to do the whole thing. As you watch the video and read the elements here that I've added, you'll see that there are 6 major parts to plot. Well, you obviously can't do climax, falling action, or resolution yet, because we haven't gotten to that point in the story. And maybe even conflict hasn't shown up much, depending on how much you've read. But you can talk about exposition and rising action. Do not try to do all of it. 300 words is not a lot. That is not a lot. Once you set up your thesis with your SOAPs, there's really not much left to do in the body of that particular journal post. So the more you try to do, the weaker your journal will be. Okay? So choose just one element and go with that. Now, if plot's not working for you, you can always just do a simple Google search. And I'm just going to type in rhetorical terms. Now, I've given you a list, and I'll show you where that is in Canvas. But you can also just do a Google search and pull up a glossary of rhetorical terms. Some of them are a little bit outside of the scope of what we will be doing, so this one is not necessarily the best list, but it does include things like irony and metaphor and climax. You can use any of these terms to do your analysis, but these are some terms that we may not actually cover in this class. But if you just go back to Canvas and go into the week folder, so I'm in week 2, and I tell you right at the very beginning to read the first 3 chapters of Lady Chatterley's Lover, but also to read the analysis questions and to read the literary terms handout. So when you click on this, it opens it a new window, and it gives you a very limited number of literary terms that you could use in your analysis. I'm looking for you to choose one of these terms. Now, like I said, this is very limited, as you saw in this glossary, and I can even go back and choose a different link, and I'm going to get a whole different list of terms. Okay, so there's hundreds of terms. So I don't want to overwhelm you, but that doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself. You might know more than others. Okay, so as far as the literary analysis questions, this takes you in a little bit of a different direction. These are just some questions that once you get the hang of SOAPs, you can turn these questions into a journal post as well. But be careful, because a lot of times these questions lead you down the wrong path. Okay? So look at the questions and decide if I can use this question and also use the format that the instructor is asking me to use, which is SOAPs. Then I might be able to answer this question. But a lot of these questions are getting at the theme. And I've noticed in the past that students have difficulty analyzing the theme. So make sure that you look at those 2 examples that I showed you previously in the lessons. Okay, lessons 2.1 or 2, lesson 2 and 2A, or 1 and 1A, sorry. And then come back and try to analyze your readings in your journal post. Okay, but my best bet for you is to choose a literary term first. You can deal with theme later once we've gotten further into the story. Okay, so when I go over and look at the journal, there are very few journals in here that are following SOAPs that are actually doing a good job. So in Mike's post here, I want for everyone to read Mike's post. And when you get down to Mike's post, I want you to notice how he is following SOAPs. He says, novelist D.H. Lawrence, in the highly criticized novel Lady Chatterley's Lover, initiates a strong struggle within the main character, Lady Chatterley. So what he is basically analyzing and what he is choosing by saying strong struggle is basically conflict. Now, I would prefer that Mike use the literary term conflict so that I will understand that he clearly understands what he is trying to analyze. But he's got a great introductory sentence. Then he comes back with his purpose. Lawrence's purpose is to clearly display the struggle between emotional and physical needs by Lady Chatterley. Okay, so again, where Mike is going with this is he's talking about an inner conflict. Okay, an inner conflict that Lady Chatterley is having with herself. So once again, I'd prefer that he use the correct terminology, but he's on the right track here. And now he doesn't have to tell us the story because we are all reading the story. What he needs to do next is now introduce the support for that. But he's going to go further and introduce the tone. So D.H. Lawrence, and just use the last name, Lawrence uses a familiar tone to illustrate this to his adult audience because he has the knowledge of these types of events from his own personal life. Okay, so I'm assuming that Mike is alluding to the lesson that he learned a little bit about D.H. Lawrence from lesson 2. Okay, so he's got a very good introduction, and now he needs to support all of this, mainly that middle paragraph. So in the body or in the middle part of Mike's journal post, he does a good job of mixing quotes from the novel in with his explanation of how it supports this inner struggle that Lady Chatterley might be having. Now, I think that Mike could do a little bit better job of explaining that inner struggle a little bit more to us. What is the struggle? What is it that she's trying to work through in her mind? Okay, but he does do a good job of explaining and giving examples of that. Maybe too much so with the examples. Okay, but I would say that for the most part, we have a little bit of success here. And then he concludes with a sort of a wrapping up of what the main idea was. And again, it's that internal conflict that Lady Chatterley is having. So I think by giving Mike's journal a read, you'll get a better idea of what I'm looking for in your post. Okay? Now that doesn't mean that no one else did a good job. I can see just right here looking at Ronald's post that he started out fine, but it's not clear that he has chosen a literary term or a literary element to analyze here. Okay, so basically he just says that D.H. Lawrence in his novel narrates the tale of Connie Chatterley and her husband Clifford and their struggles after Clifford is paralyzed. So it sounds more in this case that Ronald just wants to tell us what the story is about, because the story is about Lady Chatterley and Clifford and their struggle, right? So over here it's a little bit different because it's not narrowed down enough. Now I could go through all of these, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go ahead and grade them and leave some comments just so that those of you that are leaving comments like, I think you did a good job, can realize that maybe some people haven't done such a good job yet. Yes, they did a good job of posting, writing enough, and I'm acknowledging that. But I really want for all of us to do a good job with writing the rhetorical analysis of this novel that we are reading. So I'm going to do that today. I'm a little bit behind just because of the holiday, but by the end of today, which is Thursday, you should all have some comments on your post and in Canvas, and you can start your rewrites. And remember, rewrites will be due by Sunday at midnight. And your journal post for this week is basically a post commenting on how you think you did and based on the feedback that you're getting from myself and your classmates. Okay, so journal number 2 is going to be an easier, or journal number 3 is going to be an easier one. The focus should really be back on journal number 2, the rewrite. Okay, so last thing is when you do a rewrite for journal number 2, make sure you edit your post. And to edit your post, just hit this drop down menu and click edit. And then make sure that you add the # rewrite. And that will let me know that you are rewriting this post. Okay? All right, so that's it for this journal or this podcast. I'll see you all later.